is not included in his ontological reality of man. To this, Plato, however, might say that in man that contemplates God is God. Actually, to contemplate the one was considered the highest goal a Gnostic or spiritual person could attain. In Christianity, this might be why heaven is regarded as beatific vision, the contemplation of God. For Aristotle, however, there is no eternal form or soul, no eternal body, no eternal human nature. The only thing eternal in man is another kind of soul that eternally contemplates God. Although he links this contemplative faculty to the intellect, yet he says it is separable from the intellect. Marginalia, I think he calls it the active intellect. Back to the text. So while there is nothing eternal about the intellect itself, somehow this other contemplative soul or faculty is temporarily linked to the intellect and is all that survives man's ontological being, since there is nothing else eternal about man. Needless to say, the scholastics were not too happy about this, but then they were not contemplatives. Their interest in Aristotle's faculties of the soul must have come to a rather abrupt end when, according to Aristotle, these faculties all died and ceased to exist. Aquinas, of course, made Aristotle's other soul to be the highest point of the intellect, a passive intellect, though he treats the whole intellect as eternal. Maybe it's not the active intellect anyway. It was a mistake, however, for Aristotle and Aquinas to link this contemplative soul to the intellect, for there is nothing intellectual about contemplation. The contemplative faculty is not only beyond reach of the intellect, but the intellect actually gets in its way. Contemplation is not an intellectual activity, it is just the opposite. But at least Aristotle granted there was something in man that was eternal, since nothing else he defined as human nature was eternal. Only man's contemplation of God is saved. So where did Aristotle's human nature, or numero uno, end up? Nothing left but the contemplation of God. Really, not a bad ending. Because Christians did not believe in Plato's pre-existent soul, they would say the soul existed in the, quote, mind of God, prior to its being given concrete reality. Thus, Meister Eckhart tells us we must get back to where we were before we existed, back to the mind of God, that is. The mind of God was Plotinus's nous, the intellectual principle and first emanation of the One. This nous was the equivalent to the Logos that the Fathers referred to as the, quote, only begotten Son of the Father. Both Origen and Plotinus regarded the nous, or Logos, as eternally generated from the One. Thus, the Logos, as God's wisdom, or divine knowing, is the mind of God. And to get back to the mind of God before we existed would mean getting back to the Logos, to have the same mind of Christ, to be that of which man is only now an image. Needless to say, there is no way one could make a case that Plato or Aristotle would ever have agreed with the Christian notion of person as the true essence or nature of anything, or that it had any real being. Aristotle even tells us why not. Bare matter, he says, underlies essence or form, and the complete individual underlies accidents, i.e., quality, quantity, place, characteristics, properties, etc. He says the reason these accidents or properties cannot define true being is because, quote, no universal attribute is a substance. This is plain from the fact that no common predicate indicates a this existence, but rather a such essence or what. If not, many difficulties follow, especially the third man, end quote. In other words, since no property, such as person, say, is a substance or of the essence, then it cannot constitute the ontological reality of anything. To hold that a mere property is an ontological essence is the dilemma he calls the third man, a logical paradox, an unthinkable proposition. Marginalia. What would it feel like to center contemplation in the hara instead of the intellect? Doesn't it seem, even intuitively, that we are far too concerned with who we are? This third man, tritos anthropos, however, is interesting. The attempt to pass from one thing to another, or even relate one concept to another, there is the necessity of a third intervening thing. We might put the dilemma this way. How can an attribute, characteristic, or property of a substance be, or ever become, the what or substance of that, a thing? I'll try that again. I read the words correctly, I just didn't emphasize them correctly. How can an attribute, characteristic, or property of a substance be or ever become the what or substance of that, a thing? To make the case that a property or characteristic is an ontological reality, there would have to be some intervening thing that transforms it into the essential substance. In Christian terms, where body and soul are substances, yet a person or subject is not a substance, and thus cannot constitute any ontological reality. A better example of a third man, however, is Plato's belief man participates in the essence of the one. Aristotle debunked this view, a view, however, that would take on particular meaning for the fathers regarding the soul's ultimate participation in God's divine nature. As to how or to what extent the soul participates in the divine, no one spelled out. To my knowledge, even Plato never spelled it out. Aristotle dismissed the idea because to participate in something would require some kind of third intervening party, in this case, a third man, one that is neither God nor man. To pass from one thing to another necessitates a third intervening thing to make this passover possible. After all, if man was really God, then how is one to account for man? Whatever could intervene between man and God would have to be a third man. And who can imagine what that would be? So third man indicates some necessary intermediary or bridge between man and God. In the light of Christianity, it would be hard to find a more beautiful understanding of Christ. The intermediary, the bridge between man and God. Christ is truly the unknown third man. Indeed, Christ is man and God. I'll stop and get some more water.